This is looking at the poem Slow Reader by Vicky Fever, and you may encounter this as an unseen poem. It may be an anthology that you're studying, but what we're going to do today is have a read of it as an unseen poem, and then use it to help us work out how to approach an unseen poem and practicing that technique. So the first thing you'll need, if you haven't already got it, is a copy of the poem, and it's preferable to have one of those on paper. You can Google it. I suspect you'll get it quite easily, Slow Reader Vicky Fever, but I will just scroll down just in case you haven't had a copy of it, so you can have a read of it. Okay, so that should allow you to kind of know what the poem's about. And as ever, the first thing we're going to think of is the title. And if you're approaching this as an unseen poem, there may be a little bit of information at the start of the poem saying that slow reader is a term that actually I think is quite outdated now. It used to be used more in the 1980s and 90s when Fever was writing this poem to describe somebody who's struggling a little bit with reading. It was generally used about younger children who may not be picking up those skills as quickly as other students. So we kind of get that title setting us up for a poem or a story really about somebody who is finding it difficult to read. And the next thing to do is to look through the poem to get a summary of the story, because especially if you're writing about this, what you want is a 1 or 2 line at most overview, just letting the reader of your essay know that you have understood the kind of plot line, if you like, of the poem. So we can see here that we've got a boy, and the opening 4 lines list all these things that he can do. Okay, so there's all of the kind of skills he has, but then we get this line 5, but he's slow to read. So he can make things, he's creative, he can tell jokes, he's funny, he can give advice, you know, he's got wisdom for his years, but he's slow to read. And we get the impression then that this is really quite a young boy, because the speaker says, when I take him on my knee. So we kind of can maybe make a guess that she's talking about her son, maybe, or at the very least a kind of, you know, young boy who's young enough to sit on somebody's knee, and she's got the relationship with him where she's, you know, he's on her knee and she's practicing, or she's helping him practice his reading. So the little boy's on her knee, he has his Ladybird book, and we can see that that's glossed. Ladybird was a very popular series for young children. And again, a quick kind of Google images on that will give you the series of it. But when he's there, he's staring into the air, and we end up with this simile that says, you know, he sighs and shakes his head like an old man who knows the mountains are impassable. So impassable, if we look at that pass there, you can't get past them, right? This old man is not going to get over the mountains. So the boy is kind of thinking how difficult reading is. And then the next stanza becomes slightly more kind of metaphorical. I guess it kind of gives you an idea of how he's behaving. And first of all, when he's reading, he toys with words. So he plays with words, letting them grow cold as chewy meat. So you can imagine how he's turning them around in his mouth. Until I relent, which means give in, and let him wriggle free. So, you know, the idea that this little boy kind of really does want to go. And then she compares him to a fish returning to its element. So imagine how a fish will behave if it's put back in water. And then we get this final bit, or a white-eyed colt. And we can see from the bottom that we've got a colt being a young horse, shying from the bit. So if you imagine a horse with a bridle on, that kind of those straps they wear around their head, the bit is the horizontal metal bar that goes in the horse's mouth that's attached to the straps either side of its face. And it's a method of controlling the horse. I guess you've got something in its mouth, it's quite a sensitive bit, it allows you to move its head. And if you shy from something, you know, think of being shy, you move away from it. So this young horse doesn't want this metal bit doesn't want this harness in its mouth, because it knows that if it takes it, he'll never run quite free again. So once this horse has been harnessed, once it's been kind of tamed in a way, it won't enjoy the same sort of freedom. And we need to think in a moment what those images suggest. But generally, for the plot line, we can say that in her poem, Fever describes a young boy and his behaviour as he struggles to read, sitting on the speaker's knee, using a series of metaphors and similes. Okay, looking through it then, what we're always trying to do is, yes, we're looking for methods, we're looking for techniques, we're remembering it's a poem, so we're always going to be alive to things that we only find in poems, like end-stop, enjambment, caesura, the meter, and any rhyme scheme. But we're also always going to connect those to the content. And we need some nice clear points, especially if you were doing this as a assess piece, so under time, you need to kind of pull those ideas out quickly and clearly. So when I mentioned before, our first 4 lines are giving a list, okay, that's going to count, if you're GCSE, that's going to count as AO2, if that's how your exam board deals with language, form and structure. But, you know, if you're writing this at any point, it's a useful kind of method to mention. So this list, the first 4 lines, creates this impression of a boy with all of these skills. You know, he is creative. He has all these varied strengths. And, you know, the caesura here kind of gives this impression of the building up, the enjambment here, so where we don't have punctuation, kind of adds that flow to the list and makes it clear that there are lots of things happening. You might want to pick up on the idea of adult advice to show his maturity, as well as his creativity, from the sculptures, the fabulous machines, and the inventing games and the jokes. So this is a boy with many kind of elements to his personality. But then you have this kind of monosyllabic line here, line 5, beginning with this but. You can talk about the conjunction, which sort of has the slightly depressing effect almost of counteracting all of this list. You know, you've got this brilliant list above and says, but he is slow to read. End stop, so that full stop, giving this sort of sense of almost slight judgment, this harshness that we're getting, because we're starting to kind of build up this picture in the poem of there are all these wonderful life skills and creative skills, but the one he needs to do for school is reading, but he's slow to read. So I pick up on that monosyllabic, blunt, direct nature, kind of reflecting the necessity of this skill. And you can argue that that bluntness, that monosyllabic nature kind of contrasts with all these creative elements that are in his personality already. Then we're looking down sort of to the next sense unit, if you like, and I'd always recommend reading from full stop to full stop in a poem. So, you know, we know that we're stopping down here at the end of the stanza. And, you know, especially if you're dealing with longer sentences or more complex poems or older language, it really is a case sometimes of going back and unpicking the different clauses within those sentences, just to make sure that you know what you're talking about. So when I take him on my knee with his Ladybird book, he gazes into the air, sighing and shaking his head, like an old man who knows the mountains are impassable. So things I'm going to start picking up on is this idea of the kind of when I take him. And I think that idea of being taken reflects later on with the idea of him breaking free or wriggling free, and the mother or the speaker relenting. So we're starting to get the language of at least kind of capture, yeah, maybe imprisonment almost, you know, this boy has been taken and nabbed to do his reading. So with his Ladybird book, and we have kind of a collection of words here that kind of indicate he can't concentrate, that indicate his sort of lack of focus. You know, gazing has connotations of being dreamlike, of being dreamy. Yeah. Air is something, again, that's insubstantial. Again, this sense of the contrast here. Look at, you know, the book, possibly with that kind of harsher sounding K on the end. Contrasts, you know, the solidity of that contrast with this gazing, the air, and the sibilance here of the sighing and shaking his head. So, you know, he's really kind of sighing and approaching this as an almost kind of impossible task, as we're shown by this simile here, right? Because he kind of stares there like an old man who knows the mountains are impassable. Now, if you see, you know, somebody who, you know, is older and maybe kind of no longer has the strength they had, and certainly has the wisdom come from old age, you know, it's like saying to an old man, you know, yes, let's go up over those mountains, and the man kind of going, no, it's not going to happen. So we know that we've got this simile kind of with this idea of, again, the maturity that he has here, just saying that, you know, the mountains are impassable. The simile shows how impossible reading is for this boy. It's not something that he believes that he can set out and do with perseverance. It really is a simile that says he's given up hope. He's kind of wistful about it. Like, I'd like to do it, but really I can't. Okay. And again, the kind of finality of that decision, we can talk about the sort of end stop. Then we move down to the second stanza, and it changes focus slightly to look at how he's handling the experience of reading. And this metaphor here is really nice because it has a couple of different meanings. If you toy with something, obviously you kind of play with it, right? It almost has the connotations of you're messing around with it. You know, you're kind of fussing or messing, that you're not really doing anything meaningful or purposeful with it. You know, it's kind of like toying with your food, pushing bits around the plate. But it also reminds us that he is small. He's a young boy. He should be playing. You know, he should be in this world of toys, but instead he's having to kind of fuss or mess with these words. And, you know, we can talk about the enjambment leaving that idea sort of hanging there a little bit. Then we come to this kind of metaphor and simile here, because this bit's a simile and this bit's metaphorical. You know, these words aren't growing cold. That is a metaphor. And if you imagine you've got a mouthful of kind of really chewy and pleasant meat, he's just kind of rolling it around his mouth, and maybe there's a sense of kind of repulsion there. He doesn't want to be doing this. It's unnatural for him. So we can explain that we've got this kind of metaphorical language, the simile, the imagery, really conveying that this is something that isn't really natural. It's hard to digest. He can't get his mouth around them. He can't chew them. And this happens until I relent. Again, I'd link that with the idea of take, you know, and let him. The speaker is in charge of this reading practice. And we can say the speaker represents the sort of adult world of education and, I suppose, compulsion. You know, it's this idea of being made to do these things that this little boy has got to grow up. And in the end, she sort of gives in and lets him wriggle free. And this has got kind of the liberation, so to be free, and also kind of almost sort of animalistic about it. This kind of creature who's been captured and has now been released. This is not kind of a boy who's taking naturally to education. And this end stop here It's again kind of saying how quickly he's away, you know, the idea that he goes, boom, he's free. And then we get this metaphor to show how much more comfortable he is in a world where he can go back and be creative and be all the things that he finds more natural. Because if you think of a fish out of water, kind of flopping around, can't breathe, gasping, kind of ultimately kind of will die, I guess. But a fish returned to its element will swim away and will be kind of graceful and doing what it's meant to. You know, the fish returns to element of water, the boy is returning to this kind of creative state of happiness here. And then we get again another natural image, and we can start to hit this kind of natural world against the man-made rules of school and education. And this kind of white-eyed colt, and it's white-eyed because if you look at a picture of a horse, normally you can't really see the whites of the horse's eyes. You see them when the animal's panicking, when it kind of is trying to get away, when it's opening its eyes really wide. So this white-eyed young horse that's shying from the bit. And obviously this, again, is picking up the language of confinement, this metaphor. You know, he's a horse. And it then extends that metaphor to kind of take the idea that the metaphorical bit and the harness are something that are going to be life-changing. You know, if the boy is this young horse and the skill of reading, the discipline of reading is going to be the kind of bridle and harness and halter and everything, the boy knows that this is marking the end of his childhood in some way. You know, the bit goes into the mouth, his words are going into his mouth, but the effect it'll have is that he'll never run quite free again. You know, a horse that's been trained is always going to be one that's been kind of more domesticated or tamed. It's never going to kind of know that complete wildness. So, you know, she's comparing this young boy to a nervous young horse who is realizing that actually this bridle, this harness represents a bigger, wider world that is maybe going to control it in a way that it's never going to escape. So we've got quite a lot to say. You know, we've got the connotations of these verbs. You know, we can say shying, we can talk about the connotations of wriggle, we can talk about the metaphors and the similes. We can also sort of think of it being sort of hyperbolic. You know, these are big images, the man with the mountains and the horse with the bridle. We also want to say, okay, let's see about the form and structure. And straight away, I think we can see that we don't have a regular rhyme scheme to this. We don't have a regular meter, a regular beat. So it's in free verse. So we want to think, okay, what is the comparative freedom of this representing? And we know that the boy is creative. You know, it could represent his creativity there. We could have the short lines representing his struggle to read. You know, language is fragmented, language is broken down in his world in the same way it is in the poem. You know, when we've got the monosyllables, before we talked about this idea of that he is slow to read, reflecting the I suppose the brutal truth, and also maybe the kind of way he's sounding the words out. It's written in the first person. So again, look at what that first person is doing to the sort of viewpoint. We have the speaker as maybe his mother, but at the very least, a kind of sympathetic adult, because the imagery she is choosing shows that she really does recognize that the boy is more than this struggle to read, and that he belongs, at least for the moment, in this world of childhood and world of freedom. Anything else that you spot is equally valid. Okay, I haven't given you an exhaustive list of everything that you need to say about this poem, but if you're writing about it in essay form, then think about, how you can start to group those ideas together. So maybe have a paragraph about how Fever uses metaphor, or how Fever uses natural imagery, or how Fever uses the kind of form of the poem, making sure you've got those clear topic sentences, making sure you're embedding your quotations so nicely smoothed into your own words, making sure that you're referencing the methods where possible, and when you're writing about poems, making sure there's something in there about the form and structure of the poem. So if you were writing, say, 5 points, 5 PEE or PEA paragraphs, that you're doing, say, 2 of them on form and structure. We can look at, I suppose, the enjambment here and here and here and here, ending up with that finality there. So this kind of speculation, this uncertainty, this hesitance in his life, ending up to that kind of confinement and control at the end, maybe. So have a go. Hopefully that's helped. And do try and use that technique of kind of thinking, okay, title, story, and then what can we pick out, always relating it to the content as you go through any unseen poem. Okay, good luck. Bye now.